My name is Jim Ogden. I'm the staff historian here at Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park. And I appreciate you all coming out this morning to participate in this program that the National Military Park is offering as part of the National Military Park's recognition of the 161st anniversary of the Battle of Chickamauga, the events that hallowed this ground in 1863, the events that caused the men who fought this battle and survived it, and who survived the war, and in the 1880s conceived the idea of creating this National Military Park, of setting aside some of the ground where these important and significant events unfolded, and created for us this giant outdoor memorial and place of commemoration, but also this place of education, this place where, as they envisioned it, future generation of citizens of our nation and military professionals could come and study on the ground where it happened some of the most important events in our nation's terrible, tragic, but utterly transformative Civil War. You all actually carry forward their legacy by coming here and studying the battle on the ground where it happened. I envisioned that this could be a place of citizen education for the continuation of our nation into the future, and we certainly encourage folks to come and do that. What we're going to do over the next 90 minutes or so is we're going to walk probably just a little bit more than a mile's distance and look at part of the opening Confederate attack on September the 20th, and in particular a part of that attack that gets less attention than the other two major components of that attack. We're going to look at really the right of Breckinridge's left on that morning of September the 20th. And so we're going to leave here just momentarily. I'm going to walk a short distance across Alexander Bridge Road and gather up, and then we'll and down the trail there, and then we'll turn around and walk more specifically in the footsteps of some of these very soldiers. We'll emulate their movement. We'll walk on a series of trails with varying surface conditions, with rocks of different sizes, some roots and limbs across them. And so, as always, I encourage you to be very cognizant of your footing. We don't need any more casualties here at Chickamauga. The events of 161 years ago brought this square footage enough casualties. We'll walk a little bit on a grassy field, and there is the likelihood that there are going to be some small sinkholes, perhaps ones that have gotten large enough for to be just the right size for you to stick your foot down into, and then as you go to make your next step, throw you to the ground, or potentially do further damage as well. So I'll try to remember to point that area out a little more carefully, so that that you can be more cognizant of it. So we'll be doing that. And along on this program, another member of the National Military Park, Jeremy Carroll, be along, and Jeremy can certainly help answer some questions. And are you going to go along the whole time, Jeremy? Okay. I didn't know if they were going to send you somewhere else before we finished, but If you decide that you need to come back at some point before we get back here, Jeremy can also help direct you on a route that will get you back here as well. Any questions or observations at this point? And for really all of you all on this program, ideally, I'd kind of like to be able to erase your memory at this moment, or at least part of it, and kind of forget where you are right now on the Union line marked by these monuments. For the folks who went along on the program at 8 o'clock, the same thing. I need that, what was it, a neuralizer, the thing from Men in Black. Because one of the key things about this, this subject that we're going to do is that our principal focus, the Confederates, don't know where this is. So maybe you all shouldn't know it either until a little later on. So we'll head off that way. You all undoubtedly recognize that in making the walk that we have done so far, as we crossed Alexander Bridge Road and transitioned into the woods, we were going slightly upslope. We then went across the crest of a low rise. We went downslope through a bottom and then up another slope. And now you are looking down the east side of that second low rise of ground. Now, if we were doing this this program in January or February, I might do it differently and not use the trail. I might just choose a particular path through the woods when the understory is thinner and it's more viable. But this path turns and runs off to the southeast, and so it's not ideal for walking the axis of advance of Benjamin Hardin Helm's Kentucky and Alabama Brigade on September the 20th. But it is, for our time today, it will serve to help illustrate how the overall brigade attack at least begins to unfold. If we were to go further out to the east, not necessarily southeast, but out to the east, we would come to the place where Breckinridge's division had formed up. And just in brief summary, on the general map here, Breckinridge's division, part of Hill's Corps, had been part of Bragg's plan on September the 18th and 19th of confronting the Federals across West Chickamauga Creek at points upstream of Lee and Gordon's Mill, points further south off of the bottom of this map. In particular, in the area of Glass's Mill and Owens Ford, to the south and southeast of Crawfish Springs, or today's Chickamauga, and points down there. And they had done that on the 18th and 19th. And in fact, Helm's brigade of Kentuckians and Alabamans will actually see some action, mostly be on the receiving end of Union artillery projectiles being fired at Confederate artillery, and the action at Glass's Mill is mostly an artillery duel, and as one of the Kentuckians said, it was the wickedest artillery duel of the war, or at least certainly in his knowledge of the war. But as the actual Battle of Chickamauga unfolds on the 19th, not beginning at Lee and Gordon's Mill as Bragg had hoped and southwestward, but instead, for 3 more miles further to the north, the Battle of Chickamauga as we know it, beginning at Jay's Mill and extending southward, on the 19th, Bragg orders Daniel Harvey Hill to disengage Breckinridge's division from the Owens Ford Glasses Mill area and Cleburne's division from points just to the north, and march them northward and onto the battlefield. And Cleburne's division, of course, had crossed the creek at Thedford's Ford on the afternoon of the 19th, and then moved up and gone into action just before dark on the night of the 19th. Breckinridge's division had further to go. They had more to do to get disengaged from the Federals, and as a result, Breckinridge's division did not cross West Chickamauga Creek at Alexander's Bridge until well after dark. And Breckinridge, receiving very little direction about what to do on the 20th at that point, despite encountering Leonidas Polk, who by that time had become the right-wing commander. Breckinridge is directed to put his division into bivouac, and he does so in the big cornfield on the Alexander farmstead. And really the only direction Polk gave him that night was that he was the next morning to march north, join Hill and Cleburne on the right of the army. And before dawn, on the morning of the 20th, Breckinridge arose from where he had slept the night before, which was at Polk's headquarters. Now, what do you think Polk might have taken the opportunity to tell Breckinridge more about? Well, it was expected on the morning of the 20th, but Polk had not done that. But Breckinridge, with the only guidance he had, to march to the right and join Hill and Cleburne, will get his division out of bivouac and march them northward towards the right. One of the men of Helm's Alabama and or Kentucky and Alabama Brigade is John Weller, who's a captain in Company D of the 4th Kentucky. And after the war, Weller recorded some of his memories of the Battle of Chickamauga in the form of a poem. And the stanza about the night of the 19th and the early morning hours of the 20th reads, "On the ridge-top darkness had shrouded the rocks and the pine, and stillness brought its blessing to veterans of the line. Sweet dreams chased each other through the slumbering hero's brain, and thought he not of blood and carnage waiting on the plain. On his stone bed, rough and jagged, prone he lay and took his rest, in his gray coat torn and ragged, buttoned closely o'er his breast. And moments fleeting, filled with mercy greeting, loved ones at home meeting, love's phrases oft repeating, slept these sons of freedom near Chickamauga's rippling waters." But they'll, after that night, they will march out towards the right, and under the direction of Daniel Harvey Hill, Breckinridge will form his division on Cleburne's right. And they'll prepare for action, but they have no orders for action at day dawn, because the orders for that had miscarried, and as they formed up, Weller describes that part of the battlefield where they had taken position. It had been fought over the day before by more than just Cleburne's division that he mentions, but since they formed on Cleburne's right, you can understand how he puts them as being principally engaged there. Along the spot where day before Pat Claiborne pressed them back, scarred trees, dismounted guns, and furrowed earth, the shrapnel's track, marked the place where Federal troops essayed to stand their ground. Before the flower of Arkansas stretched they around. Beneath the forest kings their bed, beneath their branches resting, like Grant's arms, their forms o'erspreading, uncouth though kind investing, mute in death reclining, ghastly wounds defining, heedless of morning shining, dew their hairs entwining. Lay those boys in blue far from home, near Chickamauga's gurgling waters. But not alone the boys in blue, the giant trees protected, nor no tale is valorous when 'tis told of victories cheap expected. When south and west opposing lines stood waiting for the charge, neither would move till overcome. Our men were there in number large. Our glorious dead so fitly proved, they valued not the price, but gave their last gift of love, a willing sacrifice. In faded gray reposing, a peaceful death disclosing, patriots' blood exposing, dusty fresh imposing on those who were yet to die near Chickamauga's weeping waters. With no orders to attack, and the men being hungry from having eaten their last rations the day before or even the day before that, 24, 36, or 48 hours earlier, and the wagons bringing the rations for the 19th forward, the order is to eat. And in both Breckinridge's and Claiborne's division, the boiled beef and cornbread begins to be distributed. Of course, to get into this in detail would be a program all by itself. And I've done that in the past and will likely do that sometime in the future as well. But for our program today, just recognize that these men in the first hours of daylight on September the 20th, when they should have been attacking based on Bragg's orders, which never reached them, are instead consuming much needed rations. How combat effective would those men have been if they had not eaten? What has gone wrong in the Confederate command that they are both 24, 36, or 48 hours since their last meal and without orders to attack at day dawn? They will have the time to distribute and consume those rations, but more than 3 hours of daylight passed. Now, when Breckinridge deployed his division, which on the morning of the 20th, the infantry strength is just over 3,500. Breckinridge says specifically 3,503 that morning. When they deployed, the division was deployed out to the east of us with Helm's brigade on Breckinridge's left. And Helm that morning was 1,404 in strength. In the center of the division is Marcellus Stovall's small Florida, North Carolina, and Georgia brigade, only 897 men strong. And on the right of the division is Daniel Adams' brigade of Louisianans and Alabamans, the 1,202 in strength that morning. This is just a small Confederate division in overall strength, and Breckinridge has deployed the three brigades in line from left to right: Helm, Stovall, and Adams. Within Helm's brigade, the brigade has been deployed with the 2nd Kentucky on the left, and then the 9th Kentucky, the 41st Alabama, then the 4th and 6th Kentucky on the right. And each one of the regiments was assigned to send a company forward as skirmishers. and the skirmishers press about 200 yards forward, and that's about as far as they can go, because pressing just a little bit further, they make contact with Union skirmishers, men in particular of the regular brigade of the Army of the Cumberland of Baird's division. There is a skirmish fight that begins and also begins to grow, and eventually the 4th Kentucky has to be sent forward to be on standby to potentially reinforce the skirmish line if needed. If the Federals, they don't know that the Federals are not going to attack, there is some concern that the Federals might actually begin an advance. And so the 4th Kentucky is sent forward to be readily at hand to command or to reinforce the skirmish line if need be. But with orders for an attack finally received, and with the men having had an opportunity to consume the rations, a little after 9:30, the order for Cleburne's division on the left and Breckinridge's division to advance is given. Now, a whole other program that I've done in recent years is why there's a 400-yard gap between Breckinridge and Cleburne, and what Daniel Harvey Hill was going to try to do to close that gap. That is important in the bigger picture of the action on the morning of the 20th, but for our talk today, it's not really a part of the story we need to get in depth to, because Breckinridge was to go due west, and Cleburne was to close on Breckinridge's left. And so that issue of that 400-yard gap between Breckinridge's left and Cleburne's right doesn't have a direct impact on Breckinridge. It's not as if Breckinridge needs to move to help close that gap. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that, other than there was the expectation by Breckinridge and Helm that Cleburne was going to close on Helm's left, which would be the 2nd Kentucky on the left of Helm's line. So a little after 9:30, Breckinridge's division is finally going to move forward, and we're not going to go out that far, but they will come down a slope through some low ground that you can see ahead of us down the trail there, and they're going to be moving due westward. This trail angles off to the northwest, and so as we walk this trail, we're not walking their exact line of advance, but it's the best we can do this time of the year. So I'm going to get out here in front and lead the way. But now, as we work back that way, think about Breckinridge's division moving west. The skirmishers are now pressing the Union skirmishers back. Up over the crest of this rise. Regimental and brigade line. As the brigade battle line goes down this western face of the one side, they can see open ground in their front. fire more intense than just skirmish fire. The open ground begins just a short distance ahead of them. But with the reduced understory of that time, being able to see 150, 200 yards down through the trees, we are now approaching the edge of that open ground. And while there is still some fire coming from the front of them by some of those retreating skirmishers, there is also now fire coming into them from their left front, from this direction. And as the Federals open fire, and that fire, including artillery fire, begins to impact particularly the 2nd and 9th Kentucky, who don't yet have Claiborne's division on their left, there begin to be casualties in those two regiments. And another one of the casualties of Helm's brigade is Benjamin Hardin Helm himself, the shell pyramid there. He will be mortally wounded, struck by a fragment of artillery projectile. He will be carried to the rear. He is wounded, mortally wounded, almost certainly in this opening advance by the brigade line, and it's going to be a factor in now what's going to happen with the brigade. And so remember where Helm falls. And of course, Helm is the half brother-in-law of Abraham Lincoln. Helm having married Emily Todd, the younger half-sister of Mary Todd Lincoln. And in fact, Abraham and Mary were closest amongst her Todd siblings, was closest to Emily, and hence Benjamin Hardin Helm. This loss of Helm is going to affect Lincoln very greatly. But it's going to first affect the brigade, because once Helm is wounded and is started to the rear, one of the staff officers of Helm's brigade goes to tell the next ranking officer in the brigade that Helm has fallen. But guess where almost all of the brigade staff officers go? With the wounded Helm. What's that going to leave the next ranking officer for control of the brigade? Basically nothing. And that we'll come back to that in a few minutes. The staff obviously having concern and relationship with Helm, are going to go to the rear with him, but they strip off then much of the leadership of the brigade in doing that. So, Helm's brigade is now moving down this slope and under fire. We'll begin to emerge out of the open wood and into fully open ground. Where the edge of the woods were, the open ground was, I can't tell you. The accounts say that the open area was 50, 75, 100 yards either side of the crest of the low rise. It could vary some, but as the closer that they got, or they get to the crest of the rise ahead, certainly the clearer the open ground is. It's that increasingly will result in casualties for this left of Helm's brigade. coming into them from their left front, they increasingly have some sense of where the Union line is. The cavalry here to the left for Helm's Brigade, and down that trail are the markers for the 2nd and 9th Kentucky, the left half of the brigade. As they now move up over the crest of this low rise, open at the time, the amount of fire that they are getting from over there where we started out, that position that I wanted to erase from your memory for a time because they don't know it, intensifies. But because they are getting fire from down there, it's going to cause this left half of the brigade to orient more in that direction. And literally, Helm's brigade is going to break in half. And Helm's wounding and the departure of the brigade staff has got to be a factor here also in why the brigade is going to split in half. The 41st Alabama is in the second, or in the center, and 3 of its companies are going to go with the left half of the brigade, and they're going to launch 3 assaults against the Union position that we see across the Alexander Bridge Road and marked by the monuments over there. Now, why are they getting such intense fire from the Federals? Well, this was all open ground at the time. The cedar glade that was here at the time began down there along Battle Line Road and extended northward for a mile up the crest of this low rise, all the way across Reed's Bridge Road up there where the Tennessee Confederate Artillery Monument is today. And the Union Army has used this open ground as the point to bend or fold the left end of their line back, and right at the point where the line turns off of the crest of the low rise, they've positioned 2 12-pound Napoleons of the 4th Indiana Battery. Those guns could literally fire up this then open eastern slope of the low rise of ground, this cedar glade that stretched north along here. You can see cedar trees in the canopy here today. Today the cedar glade is nowhere near as healthy as it should be, but the cedar glade stretched north, and if you walk up this trail that will take you up to Reed's Bridge Road at the Tennessee Confederate Artillery Monument, you will walk through little pockets of the cedar glade as you progress along that route. But at the time of the war, it was mostly open for a mile and 175 or 100 yards either side of the crest of the low rise. But the right of Helm's Brigade, the 4th and 6th Kentucky, is going to cross the cedar glade to the north of where we are right now and continue westward. And that's what we're going to do. So, questions or observations right here? All right. Monuments and markers that we're going to walk past over the next minute or so represent the different units that attacked here at different times on September the 20th. They are not attacking, however, at this time that we're talking about. Along Alexander Bridge Road here for a distance, we're going to cross over and walk facing traffic, and then we'll stop at our next point down here. And sense that we are going down slope here a little bit, and we have now come to the marker to the 15th Kentucky Infantry. as the right of Helm's Brigade, the 6th and 4th Kentucky, and 7 companies of the 41st Alabama, as they are moving forward, they make contact with skirmishers of the 15th Kentucky. And so here in the Battle of Chickamauga, we have one of the instances where troops from the same state on both sides actually confront one another directly head on. These attacking Kentucky Confederates of the 4th and 6th Kentucky are now exchanging fire with Kentucky Union soldiers of the 15th Kentucky. One of the truisms and old saws about the Civil War is that it is the brothers' war, brother against brother. There is certainly a large measure of truth to that, and here is one of the incidents where you actually have troops from the same states on both sides engaging one another directly on the battlefield. And notice the angular orientation of the marker to the 15th Kentucky Infantry. With these Kentucky markers, they are designed and positioned to be read and understood, so that as you stand here reading it, 15th Kentucky, you are looking in the direction that the soldiers would have been looking. Most of the monuments here are oriented differently. They are oriented so that as you face the monument, it would be as if you were looking into the face of the soldiers in the ranks. But these Kentucky markers are oriented like the tablets. As you read the brigade or division or battery tablets, as you read them and then you look up, you would be looking in the direction that those soldiers were looking. Some of the little subtleties about what you can learn from the markers here on the battlefield. But notice the angle at which this one sits. It's on kind of a line from the northwest to the southeast. If we were to draw a line through it representing the battle line of the regiment, its left flank would be towards the northwest, and its right flank towards the southeast. And so make note of that, and then as we step back out to the road and go westward, notice the axis of the Lafayette Road. And I'll relate this again as we get out to where we have a view on the Lafayette Road. Fourth and 6th Kentucky, not aware of that the left half of the brigade had broken away, had wheeled essentially to the left to launch the assaults directly at the bend or angle in the Union line. The 4th and 6th Kentucky had continued westward, moving through those woods that we walked through along Alexander Bridge Road. Of course, they were moving just due westward. We were angling northwestward as we did, but they were moving through those woods, and in those woods they encountered a federal force. It's the 15th U.S. Infantry, or 15th Kentucky Infantry. And they are going to drive the 15th Kentucky back. And what they do not know, and a reason why they are able to drive the 15th Kentucky back so easily, is that they have struck the Federals at the same time that Stovall's small brigade and Adams' Adams' brigade on the right have struck the Federals, but their line coming west has struck a Federal line that was attempting to make a giant right wheel, because in the effort to better protect the Union left, George Thomas had wanted Negley's division up here, and the lead brigade of Negley's division to arrive, which had been its reserve brigade on the morning of the 20th, was John Beatty's brigade of about 1,200 men strong. And when Beatty had arrived, Beatty was deployed astride the Lafayette Road. Those couple of tablets that you see right down there and the two Indiana markers represent Beatty's position astride the Lafayette Road facing to the north. And Thomas expected that when, hopefully a few minutes later, Stanley and Sirwell's brigades arrived, they would be deployed further to the west, and Negley's division would be facing north across the large open fields of John McDonald's farm. While they did not possess this ground north of here, they would at least deny it to the Confederates by being able to fire into it. But in all this discussion, the original plan had been that Federals would occupy the crest of the low rise. That same low rise that we came over a few minutes ago where the Cedar Glade is. And the Federals would extend their line along the crest of that low rise all the way up to Reed's Bridge Road, which was where King's brigade had been that morning. But with not enough troops, even with Negley, they had decided on this alternate plan to fall back. Except one of George Thomas's staff officers, Captain Gall, his engineer, was not cognizant of that change. And when he found Beatty's brigade deployed 2 regiments up and 2 regiments back astride the Lafayette Road, Gall told Beatty, General Beatty, you were in the wrong place. And Beatty said, no, I'm exactly where Thomas put me. But Gall said, no, you're in the wrong place. You need to be on the crest of the low rise. And Beatty said, I only have 4 regiments, 1 battery, 1,200 men. And Gall said, deploy and occupy the crest until the arrival of the rest of Negley's division, and they'll then be worked into line. And literally, Beatty then will put all 4 of his regiments on line, the 15th Kentucky on the right, the 104th Illinois on the right center, and then the 2 Indiana regiments on the left. And he's literally trying to make a big wheel to the right and stretch out at the same time. So I don't know if I can illustrate this too well, but he's going to advance out and spread out along that entire crest. And as a result, there is a gap between the 15th Kentucky's right and the Union troops on the Union left. There's a gap between the 15th Kentucky's left and the 104th Illinois' right, and a gap between the 104th Illinois' left and the 2 Indiana regiments on the left of the brigade. And what the 4th and 6th Kentucky have discovered is the 15th Kentucky is literally in this process of wheeling to the right, and their left and right flanks are not protected. And even though it's just 2 regiments of the brigade, maybe 800 Confederates entirely, they're going to strike the left flank of the 15th Kentucky, and the 15th Kentucky is going to be repulsed and they're going to fall back. They're essentially going to fall back on the same axis they had been advancing on, and that's going to push them off in that direction. Similarly, the 104th Illinois is going to be struck by Stovall's brigade, threatened by the passage of the Kentuckians on their right, and the 104th Illinois is going to be pushed back kind of the way they came as well. The two Indiana regiments, struck more squarely in the right flank by Adams' brigade, they're going to withdraw that way. But finally, for the Confederates, on the morning of September the 20th, a little after 10 a.m., Confederate units come out and cross the Lafayette Road. Adams' brigade up there right where the McDonald House was, which was between the Visitor Center building and the Lafayette Road. In this field, part of Stovall's brigade crosses the Lafayette Road out of the field on the east side and into the field on the west side. And for the 4th and 6th Kentucky, moving through the woods, repulsing the 15th Kentucky and sending them off in that direction. The 4th and 6th Kentucky are moving through the woods, and as they get closer to the road, they can hear and then see the firing of Union cannon. There's a battery here, Bridges, Illinois battery. And these guns are mostly firing, because of their visibility, are mostly firing to the northeast. They're literally now positioned to try to fire into the gap between the left of the 15th Kentucky and the right of the 104th Illinois, and into the gap between the left of the 104th Illinois and the right of the 42nd Indiana. And the guns are oriented in that direction. And guess what the men of Bridges' battery do not see coming directly towards them from the east? The 4th and 6th Kentucky of Helm's brigade, the right of Helm's brigade. They take advantage of the cover of the woods, approach close enough to the edge of the woods to be able to put a volley into the right flank of Bridges' battery. Will disable the section commander and many of the horses of the right section, and then they surge out of the woods and across the road, and they capture the two right guns of Bridges' battery. Lyman Bridges, the battery commander, seeing the threat developed, orders the battery to displace. The other 4 guns are able to limber up and escape by going westward through the woods. But the 4th and 6th Kentucky has now captured 2 guns, and in the Army of Tennessee, capturing enemy cannon in combat earns you big coup. It earns you the right to paint cross cannons inverted on your battle flag. Despite the fact that these Kentuckians' division commander is a fellow Kentuckian, John Cable Breckinridge, the most recent former Vice President of the United States, now fighting for Southern independence, the relationship between Breckinridge and the brigade has sometimes been rocky. These Kentuckians can be a handful. They've got some desertion problem. They've got a lot of straggling. They are prone to be a little more foragers than other units, because what is the nickname of this brigade? They are the Orphan Brigade. They're cut off from their homes, and they had been accused recently of stealing chickens. Undoubtedly an accurate accusation. And they had drawn some wrath from Breckinridge, who, just moments after they've captured the 2 guns, rides in amongst them, and some are heard to shout, "General, what do you think of your chicken thieves now?" They've captured 2 Union cannon. But just about this moment, as they are celebrating this capture, one of Helm's staff officers rides up to then Colonel Joseph Lewis, the commander of the 6th Kentucky and the right flank, commander of the right regiment in Helm's brigade, and the next most senior officer in the brigade. Now, this engraving shows him later as brigadier general. He is promoted later, but he's just colonel at this time. But that staff officer rides up to Lewis and says, "Colonel Lewis, General Helm has fallen wounded. You now command the brigade." What does he know of the position of the brigade? He finds out that it's only his 6th Kentucky and the 4th Kentucky and part of this 41st Alabama out here on the Lafayette Road with Stovall and Adams. He learns that the other half of the brigade had wheeled to the left, and he could hear the sound of the action. And they were attacking the Union line back there where we started out, where the Union line bends and folds back. Lewis now needs to get control of the brigade. And Breckinridge, acknowledging that, Breckinridge orders Stovall to reorient his brigade on the other side of the Lafayette Road. I should at this point make use of this graphic. Breckinridge is going to reorient Stovall's brigade on the other side of the Lafayette Road, and Adams' brigade on this side, facing them south, and he's going to send them south down the corridor of the Lafayette Road. Lewis is told to get his troops back together, his half of the brigade back together again, and get them connected to the other half of the brigade. And he orders the 4th and 6th Kentucky and the 41st Alabama portion that's with him to reorganize here on the road, while he goes in search of the other half of the brigade. And what this is going to do, with the absence of the brigade staff to assist Lewis, is this is going to take this half of the brigade out of the action, and by the time Lewis finds the other half of the brigade, they have wasted themselves in 3 frontal assaults against that Union position there at the bend or angle in the line. Yes, this brigade has struck the Union line. Yes, they've captured 2 guns of Bridges' battery. But are they going to be of any further value to Breckinridge's attack? No, because of Helm's wounding and now the absence of the staff. And of course, what's going to happen is Stovall and Adams are going to drive south down the corridor of the Lafayette Road. Stovall on the other side, Adams on this side, and down into the north end of the Kelly Field and the woods just to the west of that north end of the Kelly Field. For a few minutes, Confederates are astride the Lafayette Road, the main road for the Union Army from here back to Chattanooga, just over 10 miles to the north. And a Confederate force, a small division, just over 3,500 men strong, is astride the Lafayette Road between the Union Army and Chattanooga. And they are attacking towards the left end of the line. But taken out of that action by Helm's wounding and the lack of staff for control is a little more than half of Helm's brigade, about 800 men. What difference might 800 more Confederates have made down there in the north end of the Kelly Field? Maybe not much, probably not much, because of the Union line being a line of lines, multiple lines of troops, lots of reserves, and the knowledge of Union commanders that the Union left is so critical, so important. There's a lot of initiative on the part of William Gross and Gus Villick and Ferdinand Vanderveer and individual regimental commanders like Major Beatty of the 2nd Ohio, of Scribner's Brigade in the 2nd Line, and individual battery commanders like Goodspeed of Battery A, 1st Ohio Light Artillery. There are plenty of Federals, including Negley's men, part of Beatty's brigade reorganizing, and Stanley's brigade coming up to stop them. But 800 or so Confederates are taken out of the fight here by that wounding of Helm and the departure of much of the brigade staffs. But this attack, what Breckinridge does accomplish that morning, is evidence of the opportunity Bragg still had to potentially have won the battle based on his commander's intent of getting his army in between the Union Army and Chattanooga to then be able to attack and roll up the Union line to the south. If Bragg had been able to do what? Mass here on his right opposite the Confederate or the Union left. So, questions or observations here?
Where's Forrest?
Where's Forrest? That's a good question. Forrest, having attrited much of his command the day before, Davidson's brigade and DeBrell's brigade in particular, and James Wheeler's brigade had come up late in the afternoon. They've seen only a little bit of action, so they're not much reduced in size. But Forrest is really only 3 brigades, 2 of them heavily attrited by having been fought extensively in the action of the 19th. In fact, Confederate infantry said this was the first time on a battlefield they had seen dead men with spurs on. Because typically, as the infantry is marching towards the increasing sound of the guns, what do they encounter coming the other way? The cavalry going to the rear. And in fact, the infantry and the cavalrymen would regularly jibe at one another over that issue. But because we know Nathan Bedford Forrest likes to do what? Fight. Forrest had fought Davidson and DeBrell's brigades, attrited them very badly, and they are now much reduced in strength, and Forrest had not done his job as intelligence gatherer, the eyes and ears of the army, and he on the 20th, here's Armstrong of Forrest. They're going to operate on Polk's right. They are going to cross the Lafayette Road to the north. They'll capture the Union Field Hospital complex at Cloud Springs, but they are diminished in strength. They can't stay across the road, particularly when first 4,000 of the 6,000 Union Reserve Corps troops start south, and then the other 2,000 start south as well. And they'll be pushed back across the road. So, but the biggest thing is they are not being used to develop the intelligence that really is needed if Bragg is going to accomplish what it is he really wanted to accomplish. Now, a lot of Forrest fans do not like me criticizing Nathan Bedford Forrest this way, because Forrest has a huge fan following, and certainly by the end of the war, he is one of the most effective mounted commanders of the war, and he did indeed like to fight. He probably wouldn't like what I was saying about him either, but it's an illustration of how, as you rise in responsibility of leadership, maybe fighting and making dead blue bodies on the battlefield is not what you're supposed to be doing. What is the cavalry supposed to be? The eyes and ears of the army. And who should have been out gathering intelligence? Should those infantrymen have seen dead men with spurs on the battlefield? probably not as many as there actually were. Forrest should have disengaged his men, gotten them back on their horses. Now, yes, I have 161 years of hindsight to be able to say this, but even in military art and science of their day, there was a specific role of the cavalry. But Forrest is not a professional soldier. Where is he learning to lead? In the field. And the price of learning to lead in a military formation in the field when the enemy's bullets are coming this way is casualties, the lives of soldiers. And that's one reason why, since the Civil War, the United States military has developed, at least to the beginning of the global war on terror, an extensive school system. Why, in some ways, the United States military can be said to be nothing more than a giant school system. Because where do we want our leaders to learn to lead? In the classroom, in professional military education experiences like a staff ride on this battlefield, training at the Joint Readiness Training Center at what used to be Fort Polk in Louisiana, or out at the National Training Center at Fort Irwin in California, and not where the enemy's bullets are coming this way. Because it would be, in that setting, it would be the lives, potentially, of some of our sons and daughters that are paying the price for some lieutenant or captain or major or lieutenant colonel or general to say, I probably shouldn't do that again. As Forrest undoubtedly said several times, you did not want to be one of Nathan Bedford Forrest's soldiers in 1862 or early 1862 or 1863, because he was probably going to leave you where? As a corpse on one of his battlefields in Middle Tennessee or in Kentucky. Yes, I have the benefit of 161 years of hindsight to be able to see these things, but these are some of the lessons that should be learned by looking back at the history. Since the global war on terror, the school system within our military has been challenged, dramatically challenged. It is not what it was before 9/11. And hopefully we don't have to pay the price before the ship is righted. Hopefully. Questions or observations? So in your service, what was the grade? What grade did you get to?
I was a major, so
okay.
I completed command and general staff.
Yep. Yep. And so in your time going from second lieutenant to first
Yep.
lieutenant to captain,
Yep.
to major to command and general staff college, I'll bet you were right at maybe 40-45% school time in
Yeah,
your
roughly.
service.
Roughly.
Yeah.
I kind of crossed that bridge of 9/11. My officer basic and officer advanced course was before 9/11. Afterwards was CAS cubed and then command and general staff.
Yeah. So the pace of operations after
Yes.
9/11 probably pushed your
Well, it
school.
did. I mean, I was 6 months behind to go to command and general staff.
Right, because of the need for
Need in the field.
and you may have been promoted to major earlier before your entry date in
That's
command and
correct.
general staff than normal, because they needed. Well, you probably were promoted on about right schedule.
Yes.
But then, because of the need for majors doing whatever
All the
major stuff they had you
Yeah,
doing,
right.
you got delayed going to
Yes,
command and
that's
general.
correct.
Yep. which actually probably made Commanding General Staff College a little easier for you.
It was. Than a lot of my seniors who they were struggling.
Right.
Harder than I had.
Yeah, because they didn't have that little bit of additional experience. But it also may well have made your appreciation of the value of what was being taught at CGSC that much greater as well. So.
The only thing I would mention is that it wasn't just, Forrest. I'm not a Forrest fan by no means, but Stewart did the same thing in the Gettysburg campaign.
Yeah.
I mean, to me it's a cavalry mentality that they want to go around and ride around and shoot up stuff and whatever.
That's certainly Joseph Wheeler in Bragg's army.
Absolutely.
And but this is really a valuable lesson for really any walk of life. If you are really good at something you do, and then you have another area of responsibility, how easy is it for you to fall back on what you were really good at, what you really liked to do, versus having the right view, the right picture of where you are then in responsibility or leadership. And that's really hard to do, and it's something that has to be learned or taught. And it's still a learning thing amongst military personnel. There is probably some battalion task force commander at Fort Irwin right now whose yellow light just started going around on the top of his vehicle because he decided to lead the battalion from up front and has become a casualty on the battlefield. So that has been another one of the regular critiques from 50 years now of the National Training Center at Fort Irwin. So you've got to have that right view of the battlefield. Looking at this battle in these greater details is what allows you to then enter into some of these other discussions, which are as valuable today in the military or really in any walk of life as they would have been at that time. We can learn an awful lot about life by looking at history. Okay, we need to work our way back. Lewis learns that Helm has fallen, but by the time he does, and learns that the other half of the brigade is largely acquitted, Stonewall and Adams are being repulsed, and Breckinridge is withdrawing, and Lewis then has to withdraw the right half of the brigade. He then finally gets the two halves back together again, but that opportunity for the right half to commit anything is now lost. The Confederates drove Kentucky Union troops. The state of Kentucky, the 1890s, when they designed their system of commemoration here, decided to put their state monument on that ground. And they also would make their state monument to both their Confederate and Union troops. The spirit of reconciliation and reunification, not entirely true in the 1880s and 1890s, or even to this day, amongst some, was a major driving force in the creation of this National Military Park. Not so much for the citizens of the United States, but for the citizens of the then world leaders, England, France, the declining Spain, the new rising Germany. Because at the same time that this National Military Park is being conceived in idea and then developed in actuality, the United States is fully stepping out onto the world stage and challenging England, France, the declining Spain, and the new rising Germany directly for empire. They challenged us back, saying, how can you come out here and challenge us when just a few years before you were killing one another in large numbers in your Civil War? And to show the world that the United States was once divided but now reunited, this campaign is chosen because in what campaign in the Civil War do you have both a Union and Confederate battlefield victory? The campaign for Chattanooga. Veterans of both sides could buy into the creation of this National Military Park, and the state of Kentucky chooses to erect a single monument here to both its Union and Confederate veterans. Notice the flags, a United States flag and a second national Confederate flag intertwined on the monument. The nation once divided, now reunited. On this ground, because of this action, right of Helm's Brigade against the 15th. We'll head on back. This time we're going to go down the trail. Discovery of it is marked by their casualties out there in front of this position. I do appreciate you all going on this program, and hope you learned a little bit about the other part of Helm's Brigade, the Helms troops attacking here gets mentioned much more regularly, and including on the wayside over there. Because Helm will fall not far from here, but the other half of the brigade gets less attention, but it still allows us to see part of that bigger picture and ask some important questions. So I appreciate your attention, and look forward to seeing you out on some future programs. And there are certainly other programs going on within the National Military Park today. Thank you.